Hey folks, my name's Ed Trevors. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm an Anglican priest serving in the beautiful parish of St. Margaret of Scotland that sits on the ancestral and on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Gwe. Today here in Canada, September 30th, is a day of listening. It's a day we commemorate the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. A day that we remember and we reflect upon the Truth and Reconciliation report that came out a few years back. A day where we remember all of the victims of the Canadian residential school system. Those who survived, those who did not. And we remember the impact that those schools had on individuals and communities, and we remember the impact those schools continue to have on individuals and on communities and on our nation as a whole. It's a solemn day. It's an important day. Again, it's a day of listening, and it's a day of stories. Growing up, I never heard the term residential school. Not once. Not once when I was in school, not once when I was studying did I hear the term residential school. Even in university, did not hear the term. It wasn't until I was probably 35 years old that I first came across the term residential school. Before I even knew they existed. I had no understanding for 30 some odd years that these places existed in the world, let alone in my country. My daughter, thankfully, she's learning about them in junior high, as is my son in elementary school, but my daughter and I were at the grocery store the other day, and she was telling me I was asking her how her day was and what she learned, and, you know, the little things dads are supposed to ask daughters. And she said, well, today we learned about residential schools, and we learned about some of the things that happened to some of those kids. And I said, oh, what did you learn? And she told me about some of the situations and some of the experiences that they heard about, some of the abuses, some of the tragedy, some of the trauma. She said, you know, it makes me feel really bad about myself. As a dad, that's tough to hear. It makes me feel really bad about myself. So I asked her, why does it make you feel bad about yourself? She said, well, it makes me feel bad about my faith. Oh, why? She said, because Christians aren't supposed to do those kinds of things. The church isn't supposed to do those kinds of things, and that's not what we're supposed to be about. She's right. It's not what we're supposed to be about, but it is what we did. So I asked her, I said, so you know that nobody's blaming you. And nobody's blaming our church. And nobody's blaming me. Not as individuals. And she said, yeah, I know that. And I said, so what then can you take from these days? What can you take from these teachings? What can you take from these stories? And she said, well, I can learn so that I never do this kind of thing. And I said, exactly. Right? We listen to these stories of people. We listen to the stories of the oppressed. We listen to the stories of those who have been harmed. We listen to the stories of the moment, of the lives, of the families and communities, so that we won't ever commit these atrocities again. and more. I mean, we also listen to these stories so that we also listen to these stories so that we will be able to recognize when these atrocities are beginning to happen again. We'll be able to recognize when our government, our nation, when our people may be thinking along these lines. Well, if we just do this, if we just force that, if we just try, we'll recognize when these abuses are about to be unleashed again. When this trauma is about to befall some other group. Days like this, days like the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, they matter. Because they matter to the wise. Because the wise want to hear the stories of their neighbors. The wise want to hear the stories of their brothers and sisters. The wise want to hear of their struggles, of their traumas. We want to hear of the impact that our nation, our people, have had on others. The wise want to learn. So that we never make these mistakes again, so that we never fall victim to our hubris again, so that we never fall victim to our arrogance again. We never fall victim to our sense of superiority again. Today, listen to the stories of your Indigenous brothers and sisters. Open your ears, open your minds, and open your hearts. And allow their lives, allow the stories of their families to help you, to be a catalyst for your growth. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you. And I pray that through these stories, you and I would grow to be the allies that oppressed people all over the world need us to be. The allies that God asks us to be. Amen. Nemultus.